I'm such a Spanish nerd that I have created my own plan, my own blueprint for how I would become a fluent Spanish speaker from scratch. On day 0 of my journey to become a fluent Spanish speaker from scratch, the first thing that I would do is take out a notebook and write down a few reasons why I want to speak Spanish fluently. And the big reason for this is that it's going to help me stay really focused throughout my journey, because I know the times that I really wasn't focusing on my goals and my desire for learning Spanish, I was completely lost and I was just wasting a lot of time and I was really confused on what I was studying at the time. Some of these reasons could be that I want to marry a Spanish speaker, or that I want to travel to a Spanish speaking country and not have to use my native language, English. And another one could be that I just want to have a bilingual job. So these would be my main motivators during my journey for those days when I really do not want to learn anything at all. Now, on day 1 of this journey, what I would be doing is getting a lot of exposure to the Spanish language. And I would be doing that by reading Spanish books. I would be watching a lot of YouTube videos that are in Spanish. I would be listening to Spanish music and listening to Spanish podcasts. And my main focus would be listening to native content right off the bat. So it is a podcast or a YouTube video that was created by a Spanish speaker, and the target audience would be Spanish speakers. And the main reason why I want to be exposed to this type of Spanish is because I'm not a big fan of learning a language by levels. So for example, the first few months, I'm only going to listen to beginner Spanish podcasts or beginner Spanish YouTube videos. And then the next few months, I'm going to be watching, intermediate videos, listening to intermediate podcasts, and so on and so forth. And it's going very level based like that. On my way to becoming a fluent Spanish speaker, I told myself many times that I was not ready to, let's say, read this particular book or watch a particular video because it was just too difficult. I was not at the right level yet. So that's why I'm going with this more immersive approach, so I can combat those types of that type of mentality. So with this blueprint, I'm less focused on how much I can comprehend right now. For example, if I can only comprehend 10% of a book, that is fine, because I know that I'm still benefiting from reading this book. So why is it so important for me to get a lot of exposure to the Spanish language right from the beginning? I'm going to be able to learn a lot of new vocabulary. I'm going to be improving my listening comprehension skills. I'm going to be increasing my pronunciation skills and my overall communication skills in Spanish. For vocabulary, my main goal is just to learn a little bit every single day. And that also is a part of my blueprint, is to learn Spanish every single day, because I know how effective that is and not taking any breaks. But I won't rant about that at this time. So I would also just try to keep it as simple as possible. So I would learn the most common vocabulary that we use in our daily lives. So I'll be learning about body parts. I'll be learning about, things in my home, things that I like to do. A lot of conversation starters. So that type of vocabulary and those types of topics, and being able to talk about myself in general, talk about jobs, talk about where I like to go, visit, travel, and things like that. I won't be forcing myself to learn every single word. For example, I know that depending on what Spanish speaking country you're in, you may be saying straw differently. So I won't try to learn every single one of those. And the same thing for greetings. I know you can say como ha estado or como te va, como te ha ido. I'm just going to stick with one, and then I'll just keep it moving. And I will learn a lot of this vocabulary, again, by the exposure that I was referring to, but then also by putting up sticky notes in my home, and also some flashcards from time to time. I know now to be able to learn and remember a Spanish word or a Spanish phrase really easily is to just get a lot of exposure plus time. So I am listening to this word or phrase many times over a long period of time. Also, I am seeing this word or phrase many times as well. But then another aspect of that is speaking as well. So I am also, let's say, saying that word or phrase over and over again. Okay, this is great. Every single day I'm getting a lot of exposure, I'm learning new vocabulary, but there is one thing that I am still missing. Can you guess what that is? Well, I haven't started to speak yet, so that is also one big mistake that I do not want to make again, is just reading a lot, listening to a lot of music, listening to a lot of, or watching a lot of TV shows, but never actually getting to the speaking stage, because that's exactly what I did. It took me a very long time before I actually started to practice speaking Spanish. I remember asking myself so many times, why do I suck at speaking Spanish? How come it's so difficult? I don't understand what I'm doing incorrectly or what I'm not doing. And the simple answer to that, for the most part, was that I was not practicing enough. I had no idea that speaking Spanish was a skill that I would have to develop over time. So that is also why starting day one, I would be speaking Spanish. So as much as possible, everything that I'm learning from all this exposure, I would be trying to repeat out loud. I would speak to myself as much as possible with what I have. So let's say, for example, the first week I learned 10 new words and I learned 2 new phrases. Okay, I can say, hola, ¿cómo estás? Right? And let's say the next week I can say, hola, ¿cómo estás? Estoy bien. Now, the next week, I just keep on adding more and more vocabulary. So let's say that I learned some new verbs and some new adjectives. So then I'm going to say, okay, estoy excelente y tú. Y mi día es asombroso, o algo así. So just by doing that, it's a lot easier from the beginning to increase my speaking skills gradually, versus what I did was try to study a whole bunch just for months and months without speaking. And then it was very difficult because I had so much in my head that I was trying to connect together. And then I also had to speak, which I did not know how to do because I wasn't really doing it. So it's just the complete opposite of what I was doing beforehand. And I think this is probably one of the most effective methods, also in comparison to just waiting until you are comfortable to speak. Maybe you are asking yourself, how exactly can I start speaking from day one and start connecting sentences together and all that with all the new vocabulary that I'm learning if I don't know any Spanish grammar? Well, that again is one of the many benefits of getting exposure, and you're probably going to get tired of me saying it, but that is how important getting exposure is, using this more immersive approach. I'm actually learning Spanish grammar by listening to podcasts, by watching TV shows in Spanish, by listening to Spanish music, and by reading a lot, because those things are what are providing me that grammar knowledge. So I wouldn't be going more of a formal route, like just learning from a Spanish grammar book like this one, to learn Spanish grammar, because I know that I can learn a lot of words and phrases just in context from what I am listening to and from what I am reading. And I know that this for me would be the most effective because I already went through the formal way beforehand and it did not help me that much. Since my main goal is to speak Spanish fluently, I'm not going to waste time just trying to learn a whole bunch of Spanish grammar jargon just so I can have all that detail, even though I do like learning about those things. To be able to speak Spanish, I also really need to know about pronunciation. So that's also what I would focus heavily on starting from day one, is looking up the alphabet and making sure I know how to pronounce each letter of the alphabet so I can get familiar with how everything sounds in the Spanish language. And this is also going to help me as well because thankfully Spanish is a phonetic language. So all I really have to do is know what the letters of a particular word are for me to be able to pronounce that word for the most part. For example, I'm reading my book here and I see this one word and I try to pronounce it, okay, completamente. And another one is desnudo. The reason why I can somewhat pronounce these words is because of this knowledge of the Spanish alphabet, but also because of exposure, because I've heard these words many different times from TV shows and from conversations that I've had in Spanish. Just to be clear, I am not saying that if I were to learn the Spanish alphabet all in 1 month, that in that same month I would be able to pronounce every single word in the Spanish language, because just to reiterate what I was saying beforehand, it takes time to develop the skill of speaking. And the same thing goes for my listening comprehension skills. It takes time to increase, but that is the importance of doing all this starting day one. Everything that I have mentioned thus far will definitely give me a good base knowledge of the Spanish language and give me knowledge of Hispanic culture and develop my speaking skills. But I think for me to be able to actually say that I am a fluent Spanish speaker, I need to have some conversations in Spanish with some native speakers. Speaking to myself is already a big challenge and it's also a big achievement, but I think that having a conversation with a Spanish speaker is just on a completely different level, because there are so many more things that you have to focus on. Like if I'm here just speaking to myself, I don't have to respond to anybody. But then if I'm speaking to a native Spanish speaker, then I have to listen to them. I have to figure out what they're saying. I have to think of a response if they ask me a question. And then I also have to continue the conversation. So that takes a lot of communication skills. And that's something that I would have to develop. I would develop by having more conversations. And of course, just like with speaking Spanish to myself, I would be making sure that I am trying to have conversations starting from day one and also every single week, at least a few times, whether that is an ITALKI lesson or that is just with a Spanish speaker that is within my community. And of course, just like with practicing speaking Spanish from day one, I'm not going to be able to necessarily have a full conversation, right? It's not going to be a conversation that's going to be 30 minutes of me and the other person talking. But at the very least, I can still listen to that Spanish speaker. I know this may sound very uncomfortable, but that is also a part of my blueprint for becoming a fluent Spanish speaker, is being very comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because I know usually if I'm uncomfortable, more than likely I'm learning in that situation, because I am pushing myself despite what I may not know, what I may not comprehend, what I may not know how to communicate. It's kind of weird, but I really wouldn't create a language learning schedule per se, because since I'm doing an immersive approach to trying to become a fluent Spanish speaker, I feel like I have a little bit more liberty when it comes to studying Spanish, because I'm not just trying to study Spanish at a certain time of day. I'm trying to do it all day long. So before work, for example, I would be reading a book in Spanish or maybe studying some flashcards in Spanish. Then I'll be speaking to myself in Spanish. On the way to work, I'll be listening to the radio in Spanish or listening to music in Spanish. And again, still talking to myself in Spanish. Or if I have a Spanish speaking friend, maybe I'll be calling them. And just like the same thing throughout the day, I'll be speaking to myself. I'll be thinking in Spanish a lot. That's also a big part of this blueprint, thinking, because I can form a lot of sentences in my head from what I have been learning throughout the week and just create a lot of different scenarios. For example, if I'm going to a store right now, okay, I'm gonna think about what exactly I would say. And then I'm preparing myself for going to the store and speaking Spanish, things like that. And just, yeah, throughout the day, I'm surrounded by the Spanish language. So that's why it's a little bit difficult to say that I have like a very solid schedule, because I'm just constantly learning the Spanish language and I'm constantly studying. I don't have a specific date for when I want to be a fluent Spanish speaker, because just from my journey, from my experiences, I know that can be challenging to actually just guess, especially if I am doing this from scratch. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to be a fluent Spanish speaker in 2 years or a year and a half. It's a little bit difficult to do that. But at the very least, I do know how I would know if I am a fluent Spanish speaker. And if you would like to know that as well, watch this next video.